Versus battles are always incredibly interesting because, as the great Stan Lee once said, whoever is writing and or telling the story determines who wins. And that is true to a certain degree. However, I definitely believe that us as fans, or anyone that is analyzing comics or the different animation stories that we do get, whether they are in animation, live action, a movie, or TV show, we are able to extrapolate and analyze everything that is happening during these specific battles between our heroes and villains, and then we can compare how certain characters do against said villains to how other characters in other universes do against those same villains, or against villains with very similar powers, very similar abilities, and that way we can determine who would win in a battle. Now, it won't be a definitive answer. This character wins 100% of the time. It is more so a case in which if these characters were to fight 10 times, said character would win 8 out of 10 times. Or maybe it would be a 50-50 split. However, I do believe it is possible to correctly determine who would win in these hypothetical battles, even though this idea is very subjective. With that being said, I did a video on a Robin's Battle Royale, and that did prompt me into a couple other ideas, so I am thinking about starting a versus series on this channel. Drop in the comments below if you have any other versus battle ideas for characters that you want to see face off. I do know someone already mentioned Batman, so I will be doing a video next week on 4 versions of the Batman. I'm just not sure yet if I want to do live action or if I want to do 4 animated versions. I'm leaning more towards the animated versions just because in animation we normally have a lot more battles for each version of the character, so it definitely makes it easier to justify why each character ends up winning in those scenarios. But today I want to talk about something a little bit different. It is still a versus battle, however, it's not a battle royale. Instead of that, what if we took one team and pit them up against another team? Except, what if these two teams were actually just variations of the exact same team? And that's why today we're talking Teen Titans team versus the Young Justice team. But before we get into anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. Alright, same parameters for this versus battle, except there is going to be a caveat. This is not a battle royale. This is not a free-for-all. This is not all members of the team going at it at once. Instead, we are going to do a tournament style bracket. We are going to match up one member of Young Justice team versus one member of the Teen Titans team. And as we go through, we are going to advance certain characters, and then they will advance, and then they will battle in the next round. We are obviously going to end up with an odd number at one point, so whichever team has more in the next round will just earn one of those characters a bye. This is totally random. There's only one matchup that I did specifically set up. However, aside from that, every single matchup we get is 100% randomized, even the next round buys. So who is on each team? Well, for the Teen Titans team, it is really easy. We have the same main characters throughout all 5 seasons, those characters being Robin, Raven, Cyborg, Beast Boy, and Starfire. The Young Justice side is a little more interesting just because in season 1 they technically have more than 5. However, up to a certain point they do only have 5. So those are the 5 team members they are going to get for this battle scenario, and we are going to take into account everything those 5 characters did throughout season 1. Because as I mentioned in my Robin versus Robin video, go check that out if you haven't seen it, Young Justice is kind of cheap in the way that they have a 5-year time skip and then the 2-year time skip, and then between season 3 and 4 I believe it's around a year to 2 years again. So if we were to incorporate all that, that is almost 10 years of training and experience for those characters, which to me is incredibly unfair. So it is because of that we only are going to take into account what the characters did in season 1 of Young Justice. With that being said, the team members for Young Justice will obviously be Robin, Kid Flash, Aqualad, Superboy, and the 5th one is Miss Martian, as she was the next one introduced. So unfortunately, Artemis does miss the cut. I did kind of want her on this team. However, it does make more sense to have Miss Martian on this team, as she was introduced before Artemis. With that being said, let's get right into it with our first matchup. And that matchup is the only one that I specifically set up. And the reason I set up this particular battle is because it is between the leaders of both teams. On the Teen Titans side, we have Robin versus the leader of the Young Justice Squad, Aqualad. So getting into Aqualad, this is probably the most powerful version of Aqualad we've ever seen in animation. He is incredibly strong. His hydrokinesis abilities, and not only that, his ability to be resistant to magic and different toxins is incredibly overpowered at times. He is able to do some pretty remarkable things. However, he does definitely have some limitations. To me, his best fight is probably in the beginning of season 1 when he does go up against Superboy. Granted, he does not win that fight, and yes, he does have the help of Robin and Kid Flash. However, that being said, he is still the main combatant in this fight, and he does the most in this fight. With that being said, outside of this battle, he doesn't have any significant moments later on. There is one moment where he is going up against members of the League of Shadows when they are trying to assassinate a scientist, and he does take on multiple people, including Cheshire, and this is while he has been infected with some sort of toxin, showing us that he is resistant to different levels of toxin thanks to the jellyfish toxin that he has been exposed to. But with that being said, I feel like him going up against Robin, he is going to be at a disadvantage at a certain point. And those disadvantages definitely come in intellect, because I do believe Teen Titans Robin is smarter than Aqualad. And not only that, his combat ability is definitely above that of Aqualad's. Now, I'm not saying from a power set, Aqualad is below Robin, because obviously Robin does not have any powers. Technically, I mean, we all saw him do that knee drop. He is at least a super soldier. But even taking that into account, Aqualad definitely takes this battle when we're talking about strictly abilities. However, it also matters how you apply those abilities. And we also need to keep in mind that Robin took down his entire team. And not only did he do that, during the Contest of Champions, he faced off against Speedy. And that might not seem like a big feat, but do you know who Speedy defeated? Aqualad. Was this a weaker version of Aqualad? Yes, but if hypothetically Speedy, who then gets taken out by Robin, was able to take out a weaker version of Aqualad, that would at least put Teen Titans Robin above that version of Aqualad. And considering his other feats, it definitely makes sense how he could take out Young Justice Aqualad. You see, with his tactical mind, plus how absolutely absurdly strong this version of Robin is, I do believe that more times than not, this version of Robin would be able to take out Aqualad. As we know, Aqualad's big weakness is any type of heat, any type of fire. One of Robin's go-tos is using explosives, so I could see a scenario in which they are battling and Robin utilizes his arsenal of gadgets to help him to take out Aqualad. And although Aqualad does have some resistance to electricity, he isn't fully immune to it, so that could play a part in it as well. Again, this is a random encounter, so they're not going to have any prep time for battling against one another, but if these two characters faced off 10 times, I do believe Teen Titans Robin probably wins 7 times out of 10. So with that being said, we are advancing Teen Titans Robin to round 2. Coming up at our next battle, we have Raven versus Miss Martian. So these two are really interesting because they are similar in some ways, however different in other ways. They do not specialize in close combat, so this is going to be a battle of distance. But with that being said, Miss Martian is at a significant disadvantage. Her telekinesis is not that powerful. She's only able to lift up 1 or 2 members of the Young Justice Squad at once, meaning she can't carry a ton of weight. But then if you look at the flip side, Raven is able to use her magic abilities. I know it's a little bit different in this universe. She has like that shadowy magic looking stuff, and she can literally pick up trucks, cars, pretty much anything. So when it becomes a battle of distance like that, Raven is going to take the cake relatively easy in this battle. And I know before you say, oh, well, Miss Martian has telepathic abilities, and you're right, but her telepathic abilities aren't that great in season 1. Season 2 is where they get a significant buff and she starts to do major damage. However, in season 1, she struggles to battle against the likes of Simon, who is not a prominent telepath. He is not that powerful. He is below the likes of Queen Bee. So to me, that just signifies that she is at a disadvantage in multiple ways in this fight. And not only that, if hypothetically Miss Martian does somehow enter the mind of Raven, do we all remember what happened when Beast Boy and Cyborg went into Raven's mind? There is no way Miss Martian during season 1 would be able to handle going into Raven's mind. That place was absolute hell. And you have all those different versions of Raven. You have the traces of Trigon. So that would result in Miss Martian getting absolutely destroyed in that mental landscape. And not only that, her body then would be incredibly vulnerable. And if we're talking about durability, I guess Miss Martian does have the edge there. However, again, considering Raven's incredible defense and her superior offensive ability, I just don't see a scenario in which Miss Martian is able to overpower Raven. So that is why, moving ahead in our second battle, I have Raven. But this is not going to be a complete washout for the Young Justice Squad, because next up we have Robin from the Young Justice Squad going up against Beast Boy. I know a lot of people like to underestimate Beast Boy. I'm not one of them. I do think he is a really great hero. He has some pretty crazy feats. He goes one-on-one with Slade multiple times in this series and actually gets the upper hand a couple of times. Now, I know the one time Tara was technically there and she was somewhat helping him to go up against Slade, but still he does go up against some pretty crazy enemies in this series. However, I feel like his intelligence would ultimately be his downfall. And we see this during the Contest of Champions episode, where he is fighting against Wildebeest, and they are in a cage, and Beast Boy decides to transform into something even bigger. However, he doesn't take into account how heavy the both of them are combined, and he falls right through the bottom of the cage, and he is knocked out of the competition. Now, I'm not saying that this battle is going to take place in a hypothetical cage like that. However, considering the lack of battle IQ for this character, I feel like no matter what he transforms into, he's not going to be able to match wits with Robin. And Robin is going to be able to calculate different ways to take down this enemy. And keep in mind, this Robin was the closest to taking down Teen Titans Robin. This Robin is still incredibly strong. Do all of you remember that moment in season 1 where he literally punches into concrete and the entire wall dents around his fist? He is absolutely insanely strong too. I have no idea what Batman is feeding these kids, but keep it up because it's awesome to see on screen. With that being said, that is why I have Robin being the first one from the Young Justice team to advance to the next level. Honestly, I just feel like his tactical mind and with how smart he is, he would be able to come up with a strategy to go up against Beast Boy that, with his fighting ability and all of his gadgets, would just be a little bit too much for Beast Boy to handle. However, so I do have Young Justice Robin going on to the next round. That being said, next up we have Cyborg from Teen Titans going up against Kid Flash. Now, this one's really interesting. Both of these people are incredibly smart. And I know you might say, well, yeah, obviously Cyborg is smart. He's way smarter. But is he actually? Because keep in mind, Kid Flash recreated the experiment that turned Barry Allen into the Flash. He did that on his own, meaning he had enough understanding of the experiment that happened, of the accident that happened, to recreate it himself. And he does show time and time again that he is a scientist. So while I'm not saying that he is as smart as Cyborg, I don't think that is the case, especially this iteration of Wally West, but he is incredibly smart. And yes, I know he had to go to summer school in season 1, but there's a difference between being inherently smart and actually trying in school, and also a difference between applying those smarts to school activities versus in a battle against someone using your wits and using your high IQ to outwit the opponent. So because of that, I do think this fight is going to be very close. I feel like some of Cyborg's best feats were when he did go undercover, looking into the Brotherhood of Evil. He fought against multiple enemies there. And not only that, his battle against Brother Blood was probably his best feat. That and his battle with Atlas, where he showed that he can push past his limits, even though he told Robin that his limits are set. He can do it to a degree, push past them, even though he is more machine than man. However, with that being said, I feel like Kid Flash has too much speed for Cyborg to overcome. And Cyborg doesn't really have any counter to that at all. You see, the only real counters to a speedster, especially this version of Kid Flash, would be any type of forms of ice, any type of gravity beams, or a battle of attrition. Cyborg does not handle battles of attrition very well, as we see his power tends to run low when he does get into those types of battles. And although he can push past those limits to a degree, so can Wally West up to a certain point. And considering he would be functioning with more adrenaline than Cyborg would have, I feel like if this was a battle of attrition, which I do believe it would turn into, Wally West would take the victory more times than not. However, I don't think this one is a landslide victory, as I do see it being maybe a 6 out of 10 type of scenario, with Wally West winning 6 out of 10 of the times. And keep in mind, one of Wally's best feats was going up against Superboy. And yes, he was not victorious, however, he was still able to do some damage against this character. And not only that, do all of you remember when he faced off against Blockbuster? He literally took his nose off of him with a punch. Now, part of that was because the genetic material was starting to degrade, so it wasn't as strong, and that's why his nose came off. However, I do think he could do enough damage to Cyborg to at least immobilize him to a point and make it so the battle of attrition actually speeds up a little bit more, because as Cyborg gets more and more damaged, he's not going to be able to continue that battle of attrition. So it is because of that I have Kid Flash moving on to the next round. But with that being said, we have our last battle for round 1, and that battle is between Starfire and Superboy. Now this one is really interesting because both of these characters are very strong. Obviously, Superboy takes the cake when it comes to raw power and raw strength. However, when we're talking about abilities, it goes to Starfire, as she actually has abilities. Superboy doesn't have heat vision, he doesn't have the cold breath, he doesn't have x-ray vision, he really doesn't have super speed either, which are all really important things to note. However, I feel like with this battle, it's not necessarily that close. And the reason it's not that close, Starfire doesn't really have the offensive capability to take out Superboy. And this is pretty evident because Starfire's blasts failed to knock out Cinderblock. But do you know what did knock out Cinderblock? Robin's kick. Yes, Robin, a mere human, was able to knock out Cinderblock. And yes, I will use this as a positive for Robin, as he was able to knock out someone literally made of concrete. The fact that Starfire was unable to do it definitely is an indictment on her powers and abilities, and she is not that strong in her powers and abilities in this specific universe. And she can't use her beams in succession, meaning they are more so star bolts versus actual star beams coming from her hand. If she could in succession just continuously use her powers against Superboy, I think she would have a better chance going up against him. However, even then, I don't think she'd be able to take him out. So because of that, I do have Superboy advancing to the next round. And with that, round 1 is over. We have 2 people left on the Teen Titans side and 3 people left on the Young Justice side. So let's get right into it. Next up, we have Robin versus Robin. This one, really easy. If you want this broken down even further, go check out my Robin Battle Royale video, as that one literally comes down to these 2 versions of Robin. However, with that being said, spoiler alert, Teen Titans Robin absolutely takes the cake. He is stronger, he is faster. The only thing that Young Justice Robin has over this version of Robin is that he is inherently smarter. However, it's not to any noticeable degree, because Teen Titans Robin is still incredibly smart. It's just Young Justice Robin is absurdly smart. He could hack into multiple different things with ease, but that being said, that is not going to help him out in this battle. So I have Teen Titans Robin advancing to the next round. And then coming up next, we have Raven going up against Superboy. Now this one is very, very interesting. And this one is much closer than I think most people are going to admit. What is one of Superman or Superboy's vulnerabilities? Now, again, I say vulnerabilities because it is a vulnerability, not a weakness. Weakness, vulnerability, very different. And that vulnerability is magic. What are Raven's powers based around? Magic. So inherently, she has an advantage right off the bat because she uses something that Superboy is inherently weak to. Now, on the flip side, if this becomes a battle of close combat, Superboy will take it pretty easily, as Raven doesn't have the best durability. However, her magic is able to create force fields that are pretty powerful, so I don't think Superboy would have the power to smash through those different shields she could create with one blow. Now, if he continuously does it, yes, he is going to smash right through that and get to her. However, I feel like she would be able to keep him at bay to a certain degree and utilize different objects around her to smash into him. And as all of this is happening, we also have to keep in mind the personalities of said characters. Raven's abilities would inherently piss Superboy off because he is unable to get a hold of her. And as he starts to get madder and madder, yes, his strength might increase, but his intelligence and his decision making is definitely going to significantly decrease. And as this goes on over time, it is going to become somewhat of a battle of attrition. And if she is able to attack his mind at all in any way with her magic, she is going to win this in a landslide because Superboy has probably the weakest mind of both of these teams, simply because in season 1, he is literally like 1 year old. Yes, I know biologically he's like 17 to 18, but he was literally born at the beginning of this series and he just woke up. So he's very young, very naive, and in this battle, he just would not be able to keep up with all of Raven's abilities and her magic, and honestly, her overall power. Because her at her most powerful, I do think is stronger than Superboy. Because keep in mind, he was not even strong enough to lift up a school bus, whereas Raven has been strong enough to lift up different vehicles of that size. So even when we're talking about different strength feats, she technically takes the cake. Yes, it's not directly her doing it, but it is the strength of her magic and her abilities. So it is because of that I have Raven moving on to the next round. Now with that being said, now we are down to our final 3. And of that final 3, we have Raven and Robin, and then on the other side we have Kid Flash. So because this is random order, we are going to have Raven take on Kid Flash. This one is a very interesting battle. And that is because I truly believe this one might be the closest on the entire list. If they were to fight 10 times out of 10, I don't even think it is 6 times to 4 times. I think it might be 5.5 to 4.5, or it might even be very close to being a 50-50 split. Because both of these characters are incredibly good going up against what the other can do. Raven is very good going up against someone who can move very quickly. She did go up against Moss and Menos. On the flip side of that, Kid Flash is faster than Moss and Menos. And not only that, the two of them have to always be touching in order to activate their powers. Another inherent weakness of the two of them. And even then, she didn't beat them in a landslide. Whereas Kid Flash, if he goes in to attack Raven, he does have the ability to dodge all of her attacks. She doesn't have any type of attacks that are nearly as fast as him. The only reason she's able to catch the others off guard is because she splits up their hand touching connection. So because that win state is now eliminated, I do believe Kid Flash would get the upper hand in this scenario. Now, the way in which Raven would win this is if she is able to immobilize Kid Flash in some way, because this version of Kid Flash cannot vibrate his molecules to move his body through things. That was a plot point during the series. But with even that said, I do have Kid Flash advancing to the final round. And with that said, we now have our final battle, and we have Teen Titans Robin going up against Kid Flash. This fight would be epic. This fight would be a battle of attrition. However, we do have to keep in mind some of what Teen Titans Robin does really, really well, and that is the utilization of his different gadgets. And he has been able to immobilize multiple people in the past. And I don't know if any of you played that game on the CartoonNetwork.com back in the day. It was probably early 2000s, where it was essentially a Teen Titans versus battle. When you selected Robin, one of his special abilities that you could just spam was him throwing something that ended up turning into ice. As I mentioned earlier in this video, one of the ways to slow down a speedster is ice. So I do believe that with the utilization of his different gadgets, specifically ice, would be able to slow down Kid Flash enough to where he either is slow enough for Robin to take him down, or he burns through enough of his calories trying to overcome the cold that Robin is able to deal with him relatively easily. Because keep in mind, he isn't that fast when he is going hand-to-hand combat. That is a significant difference between Kid Flash in this universe and Kid Flash in other universes. Like the Flash in Justice League, for example, can use rapid punches in succession and can use his speed during fights. However, this version of Wally West has been shown to be significantly slower for a reason. They placed limitations on him, not just his caloric intake limitations, but also how he fights in close combat. And we saw this during the training sequence with Black Canary. Yes, he wasn't going 100% all out. However, he was still trying to take her on because he was trying to show off for not only Miss Martian, but also for Black Canary. So he was to a degree trying to show off. However, he was taken down relatively easily. And I'm sorry, I don't care what anyone says, Teen Titans Robin is absolutely obliterating Black Canary. So because of all of that, I do have Teen Titans Robin ultimately coming out on top of this tournament battle, crowning the Teen Titans the winners over the Young Justice team. However, it wasn't a landslide, and it was a very close battle, coming down to the very last round. But let me know what all of you, do you agree with each of these winners and losers? If not, who would you have as the overall winner of this tournament battle? Let me know in the comments below. And also, let me know any other versus battles you all would want to see. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. And I'll see all of you in the next video. Goodbye.